gently pushing it across the bees. And if you can see, see how they just tumble in? And once I get it up to that little line in there, that's all I have to do. And the thing is, you know, I'm sacrificing 300 bees, but the thing about it is, that little half cup of bees I can hold in the palm of my hand. Now I'm gonna go ahead and shut this up, because also in your inspections, you know, we spent a lot of time with this hive open, and because there's a little bit of nectar flow on still, the bees are still pretty happy. But you don't, as we get through into the dearth, you want to make these inspections. You want to go in there and get what you're doing done, and get out of it. And all I'm going to do, I like to let it sit for a minute or so. And all I'm doing, you don't want to make a milkshake. If you start doing this, and these things are notorious about leaking a little bit of alcohol. First thing you're going to splatter alcohol.
Tripping now, John.
And the thing about it is, you don't have to make a martini. So all this, just little gentle swirling is all you want to do, because if you see the perforations in the cup, the bees are in there, and all you want to do is shake the mites loose off of them so it goes to the bottom. And you see how these, like I said, they're bad about leaking. That's the only thing I don't like about these. But just by doing the gentle swirl, that's all you have to do. And you can just do that for a few minutes. It really doesn't take too long. But a lot of times, I'll let it sit for just a minute or two on the hive and go to my next inspection.
After you've swirled, John, you'll let it sit also?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, and the thing is, I know that these bees were treated not too long ago before the honey flow, and I don't really expect to see a mites in these particular hives. Now, I did a field day last Saturday, and either there was a treatment failure, and I had a cup full. The whole cup, bottom of this cup, was covered in mites. And it's so important, because if you don't control your mites, your bees are not going to live. The reason we lose our bees is it's in the high 90 percentile that it's a mite issue. And the thing is, the mites are in the environment, they're in these hives, and even for miticides, you never get rid of 100% of the mites. And the thing about it is, everybody will say, well, I don't see mites. Well, if I open a hive and I'm actually seeing mites on the bees, that hive is pretty much dead but doesn't know it yet. Because the virus loads are going to be so high. I mean, sometimes you can do a Hail Mary with like a Formic Pro or something, and you can save them. But they have to have enough time to get a couple of brood cycles, probably 2.5 brood cycles, to pull out the virus loads. And they're so weak, they're susceptible to the other pests, like wax moths and stuff. Because wax moths don't kill hives, but they take care of weak hives or dying hives. So when I look in here, I'm seeing nothing. So what I've got is a zero mite. And that's not saying that 100%, there's no mites in this hive. It's just saying I didn't detect any. But if I do a mite test and I'm not detecting any, that's telling me that the mite load in here is so low, I'm not detecting it. So that hive is good to go for a while. And of course, what I would recommend towards the end of summer, you want to do a mite test, because most time around here, you can get by with 2 mite. And this is not, I mean, it's sort of a rule of thumb, but it's not 100%. Most time you're going to have to treat in March, because the bees that made it through the winter, as soon as they start that brood cycle in January off the maple, the population of bees is doing this. So guess what? What are the mites doing? The mites are doing the same thing, because they're raising bees, they're raising mites, because the mites are raised in the brood. So it's just that you get that going up. So if you don't do that early March, right before the honey flow mite treatment, that mites are just going like this. But if you do that mite treatment, and usually early March, and you can test to make sure you need to, you can drop that load way low, and it gets them through the honey flow and through. And what's going to happen now? We're sort of in a transition. We're getting towards the tail end of the honey flow. If those of y'all have established hives, you've probably noticed that they're not bringing as much in. The drought sort of hurt us and slowed down. This recent rain might have helped us a little bit, because on good years, our honey flow can go to the end of this month. But like last year, it cut off in the middle of the month because we had that drought last year. And we had early rain last year, but this year, we didn't have all that rain early. So we've been pretty much in a rain deficit. Well, guess what? That rain deficit affects all these trees and our nectar sources. So the honey flow was really booming early this year. It was really doing good, but then it got so dry, it really sort of just started taking off. And there's only a few trees that are producing nectar. Down in this area, if you're lucky enough to be around some black gum, and I'm not talking about sweet gum trees, black gum that grows in the wet areas, and it'll grow up on the hills too, and a lot of the white gum. It's hard to find those places because of the development, because the house building down here, and the timbering also, because when they timber, they cut a lot of those trees, and those trees take many years to actually mature enough where they're actually producing flowers. So, but if you're lucky enough to have a good location, the black gum is still in bloom right now, and actually some of the white gum. But that's just sort of where we are in that transition. And what you're going to see is these hives, if you were lucky enough to make a good honey crop, probably the 1st of June, and once this honey flow gets over, everything that's capped. Now, y'all noticed in this hive when we were looking at those frames, and I'm going to pop this one open to see what's going on. But what you're looking for, if you're going to take honey, it's still going.
You got it, man. You got it.
Like I said, you don't need to you don't want to over smoke them, because you'll tend to see, if you over smoke the bees, it really doesn't do any good. Just sort of agitate them. But when the honey flow is coming on, when you open a box up, this is the kind of stuff you're going to see. When they ran out of space, they put a little bit of this burr comb up here, and
Wow.
now, I didn't plan
Beautiful.
this. This is what I was wanting to show you. With the only problem on this frame, you've got a few drone cells right here, which those are probably going to be coming out here real soon. But what you're looking for, when you extract honey, this is what you're looking for. If you notice, almost everything on here, it's all capped. There's a couple cells right here at the bottom that aren't, and maybe there's a few here that they're still filling. But what you want to do before you extract your honey, this is what you're looking for. See this beautiful capped honey? That's what you want to extract. Because if you get too much of these unopened cells, if your moisture content is over 18% when you extract your honey, it's going to ferment. So you want to make sure you're extracting capped honey this right, because now there's very little here, but you don't want the uncapped honey or nectar, because it's got to be dried out. Now, if this was like the first week in June and I pulled this frame out, chances are they already had the enzymes in this little bit of nectar, but the honey flow had stopped, and they quit generating the wax to cap it with. Because everybody will call me in June and say, I'm trying to take honey, but it's uncapped, what do I do with it? And that's a whole nother, there's a couple ways you can deal with it and play with it, but the whole thing is, the point I'm trying to make is you don't want to extract uncapped nectar. Because this is, I mean, the capped honey is what you're looking for. And like I said, and this frame will be fine once this little bit of drone brood comes out. Now, do y'all know why I can tell that's drone brood? Anybody?
Shape of the cell.
Big cell.
Sticks up.
John, could you just scrape them off if you wanted to?
You could, but the thing about it is, you see, it's not even at the purple eye stage yet. It won't be long, but now you could take your capping scratcher, Russell, and pop that out just like that. If you took a capping scratcher and lifted it, and this is something else, a lot of people would do an easy, a visual mite check, because mites prefer drones, but they will raise just as well in workers. But a lot of people will take a capping scratcher, and when they have drones like this, and what they'll do is they'll take a capping scratcher, which is what everybody know what I'm talking about, a capping scratcher? With those little sharp teeth, you can lift it right under these and lift out those drone larvae really easier than I can with a hive tool or even a toothpick. But what I'm doing is, if y'all will look at that, there's no mites on it. If there was mites in there raising in that cell, you would see mites on that pupae. And those mites are really easy to see because they're like a little seed tick. They're not a little light brown, mite. But that's what you want to look for when you're getting ready to extract honey. And hopefully, everybody that's got established hives, that's what you've got. And the other thing is, now these hives are getting ready to go north. These bees right here are going to be going up upstate New York. And what will happen is their honey flow hadn't even started.
Wow.
So, because basically, this is what I want to. This is the hive I want to go into winter. And the reason I would, if I was using this hive for my honey producing hive, those bees have to have resources to winter over. And in the bad thing about our area, we're getting ready to go into a summer dearth. And with the summer dearth, what happens is there's nothing out there for the bees to bring in. So they're having to live on what they've stored now. And and of course we have notorious really bad summer dearths. And what you can do, and say if you had been lucky enough and had hives like this a month ago, chances are you'd have a couple supers of honey. Because these hives have been manipulated and split to make more hives go for the honey flow up in New York. So that's the way they've been managed. And these will do well up there. So, but he's just starting his cycle up there. Ours is pretty much over with. But like I said, this hive right now, if you had this right now going into summer, chances are they're going to eat some of this food during the summertime. But at the end of summer, if you went in there and when you're checking those frames and they're dried out and there's no capped nectar in there, you can feed them to get them through the winter. So what we want to do now is, you're not looking at where this hive is now. You want to be looking at where this is hive in a month or 2 months from now. Because with keeping bees, you're always looking forward. Because you're with honeybees, this fall is the start of your bee cycle for next year. If you have mite issues at the end of summer, which most of us will have, and you don't do the mite treatments to get them ready to go into winter with the bees that are actually have healthy fat bodies, because what will happen is late August, early September, they're raising the bees for the winter. And those bees, your winter bees, are physiologically different from these summer bees. These summer bees, once they start going out that front door foraging, they don't live about 6 weeks. The winter bees, they have to live longer, because that's what's going to start the cycle off next January when the maple starts blooming, or early February. And if they don't have healthy fat bodies, because their fat bodies are sort of like our liver, and it helps process it. And the mites are feeding on the hemolymph, which is their version of blood, and also the fat bodies. And if they don't have healthy fat bodies, those bees are not going to live over the winter and have that longevity it takes for them to get that new cycle started off next spring. So, any questions? This is a quiet crowd.
We're listening.
Awesome, John. Love the information.
Yeah, it's good.
But I appreciate y'all's time. And but the thing about it is, it's really important is, if you take away anything from this, when you pull that frame out of your hive, what are you looking at? You want to make sure there's plenty of carbohydrates, which is that honey, this cap. You want to make sure. Now, there was one thing I didn't see in those frames, and I'm sure there's probably some in the bottom box, is bee bread. The pollen that they're storing, they have to have pollen in that bee bread that they store, so they can't raise brood without that protein. So the whole problem is, last summer is probably one of the first times that I can remember, because of how bad the dearth was last summer. I had a beekeeper over at Lake Waccamaw, which is not very far from here. And he called me and he said, this was the end of summer, early fall, and he said, I've lost half of my queens. And I said, well, why do you think you've lost half your queens? He had a dozen hives, and there was not any brood in any of those 12 hives. And this is an area that there's woods around, and you would think there's plenty of forage for them. But what happened over there last year with that drought, all the little weeds and stuff that we don't pay any attention to, they get these bees through the summer, they dried out. And then on these sandy soils, you get that kind of dryness, those little plants just die. And they're not producing any nectar. And it's not that they produce surplus nectar, but they produce small amounts that sort of helps the bees get through the summer. And they're producing pollen to make their seeds. So what happened is, it was dry over there. And if any of y'all ever go to Lake Waccamaw, it's in a low wet area, just like a lot of our area down here. Well, guess what? All the ditches were dried out. And what I was doing, I was checking for hornet traps, because I have one over at Lake Waccamaw. And I used to hunt over there for 20 years. And I mean, those ditches usually stay full of water over there, because it's low, swampy land. Well, everything was dried out. And the goldenrod that was getting ready to start blooming, it actually turned brown before it got frosted on, because it just dried out. So the point is, when you check those brood frames down your brood nest, you want to make sure there's pollen in there, or that stored bee bread, because if they out that bee bread, they cannot raise brood. My beekeeper over there at Lake Waccamaw, what he had to do, because there was no pollen for the bees to raise with, he actually had to get pollen supplement, and he put dry pollen supplement out. And a week and a half later, when I got over there to check his bees, lo and behold, he had little patches of brood the size of my palm of my hand already started, and they were storing that artificial pollen in the comb. And he got all 12 of those hives through the winter. And when I went and did his inspection this spring, he was already up to 17. But he didn't lose one hive, but he knew what to look for. Because when I asked him if there was any bee bread, he said no. And I had a hard time believing that was like no pollen and there's dozen hives over in an area that I used to have bees in a long time ago, never had a pollen problem with them collecting pollen.
So all his hives requeened?
Those queens were fine. There was just,
he thought they left.
Well, he went in every hive, all 12 hives, frame by frame, looking for queens. He found 6 of them. So he thought 6 of them had lost the queens, because he couldn't find them. And the populations were good in these bees. I mean, they still had that summer population that was, it was actually going down, because what'll happen now, as these bees finish the honey flow, these queens are going to quit without the resources and nectar stimulating them. They're going to stop laying. they'll lay some, but they're not going to do this spring buildup where she's laying as hard as she can go because, you know, a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, these queens started laying as hard as they could lay because they know this part of their natural cycle building up for the honey flow. But as the resources dwindle down and there's no nectar coming in to stimulate that queen, she's going to slow down her brooding. So, but the point I was going to say is make sure when you look at those frames, you know, you want to make sure they've got carbohydrates. You want to make sure there's pollen in there, and make sure your brood's healthy. Then you're good to go. Because if the bees around here have enough food, and you keep the mites under check, you'll be successful with your beekeeping. Now, I'm not going to say that you'll never have a queen event, because there's a small percentage of bees that we lose to queen events. But most times, if they have enough food and they have the mites under control, you'll be successful. I appreciate it, folks. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Amazing, Mr. John.